Welcome to the discussion, Data Analytics Platform for Mission, sponsored by Splunk. I'm Jason Miller. My guests today are Frank Demina, the Vice President of Public Sector for Splunk, and Juliana Vida, the Chief Technical Advisor at Splunk. Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Let me set some context for our conversation. When it comes to IT modernization, we've heard the old adage, it's not about the technology, it's about the culture. Agencies need to transform by encouraging an agile approach, by taking smart risks, and reskilling their workforces to understand what it takes for this change to take hold. One way to jumpstart this culture change is through data. The White House recognized this and made leveraging data as a strategic asset a cross-agency priority goal. The recent update under the President's management agenda showed government-wide progress to make data more valuable. Last year, the team developed a data leadership playbook describing how agencies can develop governance and create a more mature infrastructure. In 2020, the cross-agency priority goal lists 10 actions, ranging from simple launch of the Chief Data Officers Council to the more complicated ones like updating data inventories for completeness and creating priority data sprints. All these efforts will help agencies use data to drive IT modernization and thus change culture. So with that context in place, let's turn to the panel to tell some of the ways agencies can institutionalize this change, take more advantage of data. Frank, let me start with you on the question about being, for federal employees, this time, this we'll call it the 2020s now, right? It's a tough time to be a federal employee, to be a public sector employee, and not because of anything other than demands, expectations, technology, all that's just adding this downward pressure. Talk maybe a little bit about why it's so challenging today than ever before.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's the myth of the challenge of working in public service. I think if you get outside the Beltway, everyone thinks, hey, if you work for the federal government, you drive a rocket car, you have a solid gold house. But one of the luxuries of my role in the past 4 years at Splunk working in public sector is getting to appreciate and see the challenges that our public servants face and the complexity of their mission. We get to work on all sorts of interesting projects with our public sector partners, ranging from securing the nation to helping manage government resources to helping deliver citizen services or how we can better educate our youth. And what I've got to witness and appreciate over time is, there's countless initiatives that public servants are working on, whether it's to deliver the mission or tackle some of these problems. And the complexity, one of the challenges, they have to do this all with oversight, with compliance regulations, dealing with mandates, and of course with resource constraints and declining budgets. So I've grown to appreciate that challenge. I think one of the things we've witnessed, or one of the things Splunk's learned in these years of these partnerships, is that the speed and the velocity that public sector leaders of the decisions they have to make is increasing. And the impact, the criticality of those decisions is increasing as well. Getting every decision right could make or break the mission. And so that's ultimately the challenge today is how can I make decisions faster and how can I be more confident in each decision I make?
It's interesting you bring up the speed and velocity. We hear that a lot about data, right? Oh, there's so much data, how do we deal with the data? But all that's leading to that idea of, okay, well, what decision? And then when on top of that, you're adding the requirement for citizens who are like, well, why can't I do that on my phone? Or why can't I just figure that out? Or why do I have to go to 3 different websites? Do you hear that, like, when you talk to your clients in the federal sector, do you hear that from them? Or do they get that?
Yeah, definitely. Agencies are awash or overwhelmed with data today. The data coming at them and the velocity, the variety, the volume it's coming at them. And a lot of it is in one lens untapped. And we've talked about dark data that's not being used to its fullest extent. But this same challenge is the opportunity. It's the solution to some of these challenges we've witnessed that some of our esteemed colleagues in public sector are dealing with. We often talk about a state of data leverage, and you mentioned it. And what that is when an agency or an educational institution is using its data that it's generating to extract value. How can I make better decisions? How can I solve some of these mission problems by using data as my source of truth, as what's guiding those decisions I have to make, and make them more confidently and make them faster so I can do it in near real time. I think at the core of these problems we're talking about, whether it's a security problem or delivering better services, all of these challenges, they're all data problems. Our CEO has been known to say every problem is a data problem. And so that's where, whether you're a senior executive in SES, a CIO, or you're a sysadmin, data leverage, using your data to get more value, to address some of these problems, is the solution to address that challenge.
Juliana, come into the conversation now because you're a former Fed, a retired one, we'll maybe, or just a former, but you understand that when it comes to making decisions, there are times when, wow, I wish I had more data or different data or better data. Talk maybe from your experiences of what this current environment's like for federal employees.
Sure. So yes, prior Fed, retired naval officer. So I spent most of my career as a naval aviator, and I have many examples now thinking back of a time, boy, I wish that piece of gear had been created with more data, more input from pilots, more input from aircrew. And one of them that sticks out is the squadron I was in, the pilots and aircrew were asked to test out a prototype radio that was a survival radio. The scenario being you've crashed over water or over land, and you have to get this radio out of your vest and use it to get a satellite signal and get rescued. Except as we walked around the parking lot pretending to pick up a satellite signal, first we had to attach the antenna just the right way. We had to make sure we didn't turn the knob the wrong way and zero the signal so that the enemy could find us. We had to put the battery in the watertight compartment with it had 9 turns of the crank to get the battery in, and it was like, who designed this thing?
Engineers?
Right. I'm a pilot in the water. I'm scared, my leg's broken, I'm freezing, I'm trying to stay alive, and I gotta screw this battery in, with 9 threads. There didn't seem to be any relevant data of how the piece of gear would be used. And knowing what I know now, on the other side, there's no reason for that anymore. There's plenty of data out there. It's resident in all of everyone's environment. It's this dark data that Frank talks about, that we talk about at Splunk, that is untapped and unused and results in suboptimal solutions. And there's just really no reason for that anymore. If agencies and leaders tap into their environment and leverage the data that's literally at their fingertips.
And Frank referred to this in some ways as earlier in our conversation when it comes to the challenges, whether it's IT modernization or security, or even just improving citizen experience, all of that data is available. What's the way to get a hold of that data and get that value out of it?
At its simplest form, we're talking about being more data-driven, whether it's IT modernization, whether it's cybersecurity, meeting compliance mandates. How do I do that in a more data-driven fashion? And it was easy, everyone would be doing it already. It is complex, and you think about some of the challenges in our large federal agencies, data's in silos. We have legacy systems that don't interoperate well, and connecting them, it can be a challenge. But I want to be clear, we're not just talking about collecting data, right? This is a new approach. There's many technologies and approaches out there to help you collect it, and that's a challenge, and that's not been completely solved. But what we're talking about is operationalizing data. How do I actually use data in a way where I have it at my finger when I need it? So to Juliana's point, it's not just about having it. I can present it to someone in a format they can digest and consume at the right time. And so when you talk about being data-driven, it's not a binary state. It's not I'm data-driven or I'm not. It's actually what we've seen working with every government agency out there, 15 cabinet level agencies, state and local governments, education institutions. We've seen that it's a maturity journey. And so what we see as our mission at Splunk is to help our customers that we partner with to progress in that journey to be more data-driven. And we actually have a model for it. We talk about it in an IMAA fashion, which stands for Investigate, Monitor, Analyze, and Act. And so when you think about it, at the core foundation, a lot of the problems that public sector folks deal with is that investigative part, that first phase of that journey. And if you think about the main task of someone who works in government today, an information worker, they're often asked to say, well, what happened and why did it happen? And so that's one of the things where being able to conduct investigations, have access to data, and being able to bring all these sources together, it creates visibility so you can ask questions with confidence.
Julian, I think that's the key, ask questions with confidence. Going back to your story and your experiences, someone who just asked you, hey, we're designing this thing, you're a pilot, what should we know, right? It's a simple, and I've been at several conferences over the last couple of months, and this idea of user-centered design, right, seems to come up time and again, and that's got to be the data. That's how you use the data. Talk maybe a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of how can agencies solve these problems of making the data valuable?
Right, sure. So one of the things I'd like to go back to that Frank was talking about with the challenges, and I'll get to the answer to your specific question, is all of these mandates and initiatives that are put on top of agencies and agency employees. One descriptor that we should not ignore is the unfunded descriptor. So the unfunded mandate. the bane of the existence of most government employees, I would say, at least in my experience. And that adds a whole nother layer of challenge. However, when agencies start to look at their data, they'll realize they already have a resource that they didn't know was there. If they start to tap into it, they don't have to do more with less necessarily. They do more with what they already have. They just don't know they have it. So for example, we have one customer that's a national lab, and they are using their data to do what a lot of our customers do. Initially, they use it for cybersecurity. They use it to protect highly sensitive mission information against cyber attacks and increasingly sophisticated threats. But what they started to realize is that they can use that same data, those same data sets, to address a financial issue, which is to eliminate unnecessary license purchases that they've made. Now, they didn't go into that thinking, oh, we're going to save money on licenses if we start with cybersecurity. But as they started to dig into the data and get more curious about what else can we do with this data, they ended up saving, they had a 30% savings in license expenditures. And that makes the difference in every agency.
And that becomes real money too. I mean, real value. Someone sees it and goes, oh, can you do that for me? Mm-hmm. And then that builds that confidence in that, oh, we have pretty good data. And again, even if it's not 100% perfect data, which I'm not sure that exists in the world. And you bring up cybersecurity as well. Let's walk through that, because the other piece of it is, let's make sure this data is secure, or at least securely shared.
Mm-hmm. So cybersecurity is one of our core capabilities. It's how Splunk is, good or bad, often known as our core capability. It is one capability, but we've kind of built on that. And Frank actually built most of his career around cybersecurity. And
then they pulled him into the data world?
Right, exactly, and said, let's talk about what else is going on here.
Maybe Frank, jump in here as well, because let's maybe talk a little bit about the security piece, because it's one thing to say, okay, you have all this data, okay, how do I share it and who gets it? And the dashboard piece is great, but if Juliana can only see the dashboard and you have the ability to read and write the dashboard.
Yeah, I think there's two thoughts there. So first, I talked about this maturity journey, like moving from an investigative phase to an analytics phase to eventually act. Once you are able to ask those questions and get the answers you want, you can start doing more advanced analytics. So now I can start taking advantage of technologies like machine learning to look at massive data sets. And that's one of the challenges in cybersecurity, is that the data that has to be analyzed and looked at in the window of time that I can do it is very short, is almost reaching a point where it's incapable of a human processing. So we can leverage technology to do that for us and to spot trends and patterns and techniques and tactics adversaries using to be more proactive and adjust cybersecurity. But what Juliana was touching on too that I think is really important is this concept of data reuse. That same data that I'm taking in from a server that tells me if someone's trying to brute force passwords or compromise the database on that password can also tell me how is that system performing. And if I'm in public service, I have to deliver citizen services. I want to know, did my users using the application, did they have a lot of wait time? Were they getting errors? Were they getting routed? Were they canceling transactions because they didn't complete? And so being able to get multiple value stacks, delivering a better service, that's a real mission value add from the same data that helps me secure the system and know that it's protected and safe. And that's really this concept of data leverage is all about.
We're going to take a quick break and come back. We have so much more to talk about when it comes to data. You're listening to the discussion, Data Analytics Platform for the Mission, sponsored by Splunk on Federal News Network.